Hey, welcome back to our Achievement Hunters series, aimed at dancing our way through the Stormwind gameplay achievements. We've been quite persistent, so previous guides covered all the class achievements from Warrior through Demon Hunter, and this time we're ready to entrap all of the neutral achievements. There are a whopping 19 neutral achievements to travel through, so let's get into it. This should be interesting. As mentioned a moment ago, we're covering all 19 neutral achievements this time. So real quick, they are Hero's Journey, Return of the King, What is Your Profession, Want to Buy, Butter My Biscuits, and No Layover. We're also covering Toss a Coin to Your Dancer, Guild Vault, Want to Sell, the Mystery Achievement, Forgot This at Home, and Inside Sources. But of course, that's not all. We're also looking at It's My Way or Hogger's Highway, Let's Ride, Snakes on a Blade, That Which Has No Life, The Adorable Aspect, The Usual Suspects, and finally, They Carry My Potions. There are lots of different cool and interesting ways to knock out almost every one of these achievements, but since we don't want this guide to be the length of a feature film, I hope it's not, we'll cover a maximum of 3 decks per achievement in this video. Though sometimes there will be deck codes below for alternative ideas. However, for a few of the achievements, we'll only introduce one deck. It just depends. If you're here for a specific achievement, let me note that all our guides include timestamps for each achievement and deck codes for each deck mentioned in the description below in case you'd like to skip to one you're looking for. Now, if you're ready for some honest work, let's start farming these achievements. To begin, let's start off with a few of the one and done achievements, starting off with the Adorable Aspect. For this one, we need to play a 0-mana legendary dragon. As everyone gets a free copy of Lady Prestor as the first reward from the rewards track, and Murloc Tinyfin is free with the core set, enough games with a deck running those 2 cards will knock this one out. One of the decks we'll be introducing uses Lady Prestor to help us get 0-mana dragons, but since the dragons from Dragon Queen Alexstrasza have had their cost returned to 0 mana, she's also an effective way to complete this now that a few games in Wild can actually last until turn 9 or later. Initially, I was going to recommend an updated version of our Prestor's Discipline Warlock that we used to knock this achievement out on day 1, and we've included a code in the description if you'd prefer to go that route, but it proved quite challenging to draw to and play out Lady Prestor and then draw our 0-mana dragons against any current meta decks. So, the deck we're recommending for standard is this adorable Brightthune Priest. It's running the free, low mana cost legendary dragon Brightwing alongside Nazmani Bloodweavers and a whole lot of spells. Insight serves as targeted draw for Brightwing and the Nazmani Bloodweavers, but the deck is also running Gadget and Auctioneers to help cycle through the deck with Cthulhu as a finisher. If you just want to complete this achievement ASAP, you could drop the Auctioneers and Cthulhu for a couple more cheap spells to make the Insights even more consistent at drawing Brightwing and the Bloodweavers. With a few spells after playing a Nazmani Bloodweaver or 2, it'll be pretty easy to drop Brightwing to 0 mana, meaning you'll be playing a 0-mana legendary dragon quite quickly. If you do want to use Lady Prestor to knock this out, I'd recommend heading over to Wild and trying out this Penguin Dragons Warlock. The deck has 3 minions, Snowflipper Penguin, Northshire Farmer, and Lady Prestor. Free admission and the Dark Portal will help you pull your minions out, and you can shuffle 3 0-mana 3/3 penguins into your deck before playing Lady Prestor for a few extra shots at a 0-mana legendary dragon. The free admissions still feel great after Lady Prestor, and the Dark Portal might discount a farmer turned dragon down to 0 mana if you didn't draw him before playing her. The rest of the deck is just meant to keep you alive long enough to draw through the deck and get the cards you're looking for. Best of luck summoning an amazingly adorable aspect. Next up, let's finish the Lord of the Rings trilogy with Return of the King. Oh wait, we're making a Hearthstone video. Yeah. Let's escort Varian, King of Stormwind, to the board so he can yank a Taunt, Rush, and Divine Shield minion from our deck. Any deck running Varian alongside a decent number of Taunt, Rush, and Divine Shield minions can pull this off pretty effectively. If you don't have Varian, you'll have to go hunting in duels or arena, but it's more likely you can pull this off in a targeted deck in duels rather than with a limited draft options in arena. As he is 8 mana, a deck running 7 cost and lower minions alongside Varian can draw him a little more consistently with help from Polkelt or Talon. So if you're struggling to complete this one with one of the decks we introduce, you might consider swapping one of these into the secret buff Paladin deck we've included a code for in the description. It's a strong deck that uses him very effectively. Outside of Paladin, there aren't all that many exciting Divine Shield minions to play alongside Varian, but we've also included a code for the deck we used to pull this off during the first week of the expansion, which turned into one of our first Hearthstone highlights for Stormwind. Triple Diamond Menagerie Priest. You can check out the highlight linked in the description to see how that plays out. However, if you just want to have fun while knocking this out, a deck that's very interesting to play the King of Stormwind with is this Varian Celestial N'Zoth Druid. It runs quite a bit of mana ramp to get you to 8 mana quickly, or if you play Celestial Alignment first, you can drop a 1 mana copy of Varian onto the board to gain all 3 buffs. Dropping an Oracle of Elune onto the board after Celestial Alignment so that you get multiple Kings, Moarg Forge Fiends, and Claw Machines at once is quite fun. With just a couple Taunt and Rush minions, there is a risk of drawing them before Varian, so while the consistency of getting Celestial Alignment might drop, you may consider swapping the Primordial Protectors for Scrapyard Colossuses or Fizzy Elementals if you don't complete the achievement the first game or two. Over in Wild, a deck with a similar concept, but a couple bigger Divine Shield minions is this Celestial Varian Druid. It still has nice ramp tools to get to 8 mana or a Celestial Alignment quickly, but the boards you can build after Celestial Alignment are even more impactful, especially if you can break your Twig of the World Tree immediately after playing Celestial Alignment. Though a stealth escaped Mana Saber into a Nourish on the same turn as Celestial Alignment into a couple huge threats is a strong play as well. There's a lot of fun to be had with this one as you wait to draw Varian. Have fun orchestrating the return of the king. Now on to the achievement which may prove to be one of the most difficult. That which has no life. Now, I say this one is difficult, not because it's a challenge to play out and kill off 7 Elwyn boars, which is a bit challenging, but you actually have to destroy your opponent with the Sword of 1,000 Truths, which the boars give you. Many opponents concede after you summon the sword and attack with it, rather than waiting for you to kill them. So, that adds a layer of difficulty to this achievement, as just summoning the sword isn't enough. Since everyone gets golden copies of the boars at level 65 and 75 of the rewards track, getting the boars shouldn't be an issue. When the boars were announced, I thought Hunter would be the best class for summoning and killing off 7 of them, but the first 2 decks we're covering are both using Priest. The deck we use to pull this off in Wild is this Vivid Truth Priest from HS Replay. Since the boars are the only minions in the deck, Insight will pull them into our hand, and when on board, we can use Embalming Ritual and Vivid Nightmare for additional copies. Once a couple have died off, Resurrect and Twilight's Call will allow you to get even more boars, which you can kill off with Mass Hysteria or regular Hysteria on a big enemy minion. It's a fairly reliable way to get the Sword of Truth, but once you do, you have to hope the opponent doesn't just concede. We felt very fortunate that our opponent in the gameplay shown here let us take a second strike with it. But how about Standard? The deck we found to be the most efficient at equipping the sword in Standard is this Insightful Boars Priest from Funky Monkey. In addition to the boars, this deck is also running Terran Gorefiend. But that's all. So the insights are still very targeted in what they draw. With Raise Dead and Rally to bring them back, and Gift of Luminance or Psyche Split to copy them or a Terran with a couple boars inside, it's quite possible to have the Sword of a Thousand Truths on turn 6. In the highlight video linked above and in the description, there were a couple games where we had everything set up to equip it on turn 7, but one of those had a rather comical, unexpected twist. So for consistency in equipping the sword, those are the two decks we'd recommend. However, neither deck does much face damage without the sword itself, so killing off the opponent with it will require a second or even a third swing. Hopefully you'll run into an opponent who will actually be willing to wait for you to finish them off, but we did also try a few other builds in an effort to put the opponent down to a low life total so that a single swing with the sword would be sufficient to finish them off. Sadly, none of the decks proved very effective at summoning the sword and dealing damage as we worked towards the sword. But one of the decks with the most promise is this Dwarven Quest for Truth Hunter. It runs the newly buffed Leatherworking Kit and Selective Breeder alongside the Northshire Farmer, Devouring Swarm, and a single Jewel of N'Zoth for plenty of potential boar summons. However, the majority of the deck is centered around the Hunter questline as a way to control the board and put the opponent's health within range of a single sword strike. It's not as efficient at completing the questline as normal questline decks, and it's not as efficient at summoning the boars quickly as a few other builds, but it has the tools necessary for the specific objectives of this achievement if you can face off against a deck that doesn't just aggro you to oblivion or kill you from 30 health on turn 8 without playing a single minion before Varden. One note that is nice about this deck for summoning the sword is that your hero power and all of your spells are cheap ways to kill off your boars yourself if you need to. So, even without minions to run the boars into, or without waiting until the following turn, you can take care of them yourself. Lastly, I will bring up duels as an interesting option for this. Although you can only include one copy of the boar in your deck, you can run Devouring Swarm, Selective Breeder, Shando Wildclaw, and even Zola the Gorgon to get extra copies. With Northshire Farmer and Dire Frenzy to shuffle additional copies into your deck, and the Bone Crusher Signature Treasure to get you 2 extra copies, it's not out of the question to equip the Sword of a Thousand Truths in duels. And since the deck size and hero health totals are so low at the start of the run, it's entirely possible you could take down an opponent in a single swing once you're able to equip it. The Hunter deck and going after it in duels are both less likely to allow you to summon the sword nearly as consistently as the Priest decks introduced, but there are a lot of ways to come at this one. Hopefully it doesn't take too long to take down an opponent with the sword once you figure out which method works best for you. Good luck finishing this one while you still have a life. The Stormwind Mystery Achievement takes a fair bit of time to complete, but it's actually not very difficult to do if you're following a step-by-step guide. That's precisely what we did in our walkthrough video linked in the description. There were a few things we had to figure out ourselves even using the guide, which has a link included alongside other resources in the description of the walkthrough video. But once we understood what it meant, things went quite smoothly. So if you haven't completed this one yet, check out that walkthrough for the resources that will help knock it out. Onward to the last of the one and done achievements, the usual suspects. For this one, all you have to do is summon a legendary minion from Stubborn Suspect. So your best bet to tackle this one is to summon a bunch of suspects in a single game, or trigger his death rattle multiple times per game. In Wild, N'Zoth the Corruptor is a nice inclusion for extra shots at this. And if you're playing as Rogue, Togwaggle's scheme will likely give you plenty of chances to summon him. However, as mentioned in the intro, we don't want this guide to be excessively long, so almost all of the achievements moving forward will only have 1 or 2 recommended decks, which we introduce after a few suggestions on strategy for approaching it. So if the deck we recommend doesn't fit your taste, hopefully the ideas covered will help in crafting your deck to knock it out. For this one, we used this Garrote Suspect Rogue. It uses a Garrote Rogue shell, but sketchy information can help us pull the Stubborn Suspect from the deck and trigger his death rattle an additional time for us. We ended up completing this one by summoning the legendary from Stubborn Suspect dying on board before we summoned a legendary via any other means, so I can't say with 100% certainty that the death rattle triggered from sketchy information would count. It should, but we can't guarantee it. And on a similar note, Counterfeit Blade copying the suspect's death rattle may also count for this, but that's a little bit more dubious. If you have summoned a legendary via sketchy information or Counterfeit Blade and it counted for the achievement, or didn't count, would you leave a comment below to let us know? If it doesn't count, Gift of Luminance in Standard or copy cards alongside onboard minion death rattle triggers in Wild will be your best bet for more chances per game. Good luck tracking down the usual suspects. Another achievement that Rogue is likely the most efficient class to tackle the achievement with is Toss a Coin to Your Dancer. Mailbox Dancer is an option which allows any class to come after this, and a deck we tried with Bolner Hammerbeak in Shaman was effective at adding quite a few coins to our hand quite quickly, but the win rate with that deck was not amazing. And there were other far more impactful battle cries to trigger in that deck. In Wild, Umbral Skulker in Galakron Rogue can get you quite a few coins per game, especially alongside bounce effects. But the card that's the easiest to generate lots of coins with is Loan Shark. The first deck we're introducing for this one is one we covered previously in our Rogue edition. This Loaned Garrote Rogue from HS Replay uses sketchy information to pull the Loan Sharks from the deck and give us 2 coins right away. And then you still get credit towards this achievement when you give your opponent a coin with Loan Shark's Battlecry before getting a few more coins in your own hand when it dies. The win rate of the deck is averaged around 44%, and it's a challenging deck to navigate effectively. So by the time you learn how to play it well, you'll likely be done with this achievement. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'll let you decide. But if you're looking for a really fun deck to tackle this achievement, this big Control Rogue from Chump is stupidly fun. You still use sketchy information to draw the Loan Sharks into your hand and generate additional coins, but instead of using them to cycle through the deck with Auctioneer, you use the coins to cheat out huge minions several turns early. Armor Vendor, Flightmaster Doongar, and Lion's Guard can help you stay alive until you start dropping the huge bodies. And with so many amazing taunts of different minion types, the value from N'Zoth is absurd, especially if you Shadow Step him. I'll admit, I've been missing getting crazy value with Rogue ever since the Thief Rogue cards rotated to Wild. But this deck scratches an itch that even Scabs couldn't reach, all while generating a ridiculous number of coins per game, as the Sharks come back from N'Zoth as well. Have fun tossing coins everywhere. Next up, we're building a guild vault, which the enthusiastic banker is so very excited to help us finish. For this one, even if your opponent transforms or silences her, you'll still get progress towards the achievement for the cards which were stored at the end of your turn. So you just have to play enough copies of her or keep her alive long enough to store a bunch of cards. Still, 50 cards is a lot, and she hasn't really made the cut in any meta decks, so we decided to go after this achievement with reckless abandon and summon as many enthusiastic bankers in a single game as we could. The deck? This enthusiastic schemes rogue in Wild uses a mill rogue shell, but in place of cold light oracles, we've got enthusiastic bankers and Drakari enchanters. Who were we milling? Only ourselves. But with an early Togwaggle scheme, you can shuffle quite a few bankers into the deck, which can then draw each other. Bankception? Cloak of Shadows, Evasion, Vanish, and Valera can all buy you a few extra turns to drop bankers and build your progress. And if you drew a banker from Shroud of Concealment, there's a decent chance she'll stick to the board for an extra turn. Now, I should mention that our win rate with this deck was an amazing 100% losses. And we did end up knocking this out quite a bit faster than you might otherwise expect, thanks to an understanding opponent letting us play 2 extra turns, even though they had absurd over-the-top lethal. So we didn't have to play nearly as many games with this as initially anticipated to complete it. That being said, even after completing the achievement, we have used Enthusiastic Banker in a couple decks as uniquely minion-based card draw. This Celestial Illusion Hero Power Mage we highlighted just recently uses the recently buffed Wildfire and Mordresh in an almost entirely minion-filled mage deck. The only spells in the deck are Wildfire and Potion of Illusion, so that Starscryer and Frostweave Dungeoneer will be guaranteed to draw them. What's more, we've got a copy of Celestial Inkset in the deck as a way to potentially drop the Potions of Illusion down to 0 mana with spells generated by Wand Thief, Pandaren Importer, and Venomous Scorpid. A 0 mana Potion of Illusion or two means all the more fun with Mordresh or Alexstrasza once they're ready to play. But without all the amazing draw spells at Mage's disposal, how do we cycle through the deck? That's where Enthusiastic Banker comes in. Daddy Rome is in the deck too, but the bankers come down much faster, and if we're really hurting for cards, a Potion of Illusion on the bankers can help a lot, and get extra points of progress towards this achievement while we're at it. This was a fun way to use the banker, so if you'd like to see the deck in action, check out the link in the description. Best of luck constructing your Guild Vault. And now, let's tackle the achievement with a minion that has fallen even further out of favor with meta decks than even the Enthusiastic Banker, Flightmaster Dungar. His achievement is No Layover, where we just have to spend 50 turns on his flight paths. He doesn't have to wake up for you to get progress, so if you myrtleize your opponent, or they decimate you before Dungar wakes up, you still get credit for each turn played since dropping him. Before Stormwind came out, there were quite a few decks experimenting with Dungar, but since the expansion arrived, he hasn't made the cut in many decks. Still, he's an interesting tech card that you can just toss in and get progress towards this achievement. And if you want to get a little extra progress with him in Standard, your options are to bounce him with Youthful Brewmaster when he wakes up, copy him in hand with Zai the Incredible or Nobleman, give him Taunt and copy him with Mark of the Spikeshell, or bring him back with Raise Dead. As we had a fair number of flight path turns left to knock this one out, we decided to take a bunch of flights all at once with this 5-turn kill Wild Warlock deck we modified from Mark McKay's list, which he introduced before Stormwind came out. This version includes Spice Bread Baker and Entitled Customer as newer control options, and Ruined Mithril Rod as another discount enabler. The idea of this deck is to play Summoning Portal onto the board, drop Glinda Crowskin, and then flood the rest of the board with Flightmaster Dungars, all headed to the Plaguelands. In order to play 4 Dungars, you just need 1 discount on the Portal and Glinda. But if you want to play 5 Dungars, you'll need an extra discount from the Mithril Rod or Thaurissan. Since the Dungars will take up 4 or 5 spots on the board, you'll only have 2 or 3 spots to play minions as you strive to stay alive on the flight paths. Here is where you might guess why I made a special note about getting progress even if one of you dies while Dungar is in flight. But when you make it to the Plague Lands with this deck, Doomgar will spew 48 to 60 damage on the opponent and their board, killing all but the most resilient of opponents, and ensuring your achievement is 40 or 50% complete with that single game. Good luck playing Doomgar in a way that there's no layover. To conclude our journey of achievements with minions that just need to be tossed into the deck and played for progress, we've got Forgot This at Home. For this one, you just need to discover 50 spells with Pandaren Importer. Any deck will do, but sadly, extra spells from Bolner Hammerbeak won't count. We did try out a fun deck from Chump with every standard shaman spell except Lightning Bloom, Overdraft, and Lightning Bolt alongside Bolner, Pinflinger, and the Importer. But we only got 1 point of progress, even though we discovered close to 20 spells. We're not going to post the deck code here because if there is a shaman spell introduced in the mini set here soon, the OTK will no longer have any chance of working. As is, sometimes you got stuck without having enough Lightning Blooms to keep going. Okay, getting back on track. Since we can't cheat progress with Bolner, our fastest option is to play lots of copies of Pandaren Importer per game. In Standard, we did that with this Pandaren Potions Quest Rogue. It uses the usual bounce cards of Shadowstep and Tinwu, but since the Importer is only 2 mana, it's not difficult to play Potion of Illusion with her as well. And, as you can see in the background now, sometimes you get to copy 2 Pandarens with a single potion, granting even more progress. Of course, a 1-mana 1/1 copy of Spymaster Scabs from a potion feels pretty good too. So this deck has a few fun directions it can pivot, depending on the matchup. Speaking of fun directions, when trying to figure out a way to get bonus value from the Pandaren Importer's effect, we realized that she goes exceptionally well in an Open the Waygate mage deck. So we tossed her and a couple Potions of Illusion into a draw-heavy deck alongside a few other discovery spells and watched the chaotic value unfold in spectacular ways. When starting the experiments with this deck, I didn't imagine we'd be able to play 8 Importers in a single game, but it worked out. One concern I had setting out with this was that we wouldn't have enough damage to close out the game without a built-in finisher aside from extra turn. But it seems I was underestimating Pandaren Importer and Mage's discovery options, because although we faced a number of peculiar decks, the deck ended with well over a 50% win rate, even while the questline was still ravaging wild. Anyways, however you choose to go about this one, best of luck importing lots of things you never knew you wanted. This next achievement, Inside Sources, is similar to the last few we've covered, except that in order to discover a card from Entrapped Sorceress, you have to play her in a deck with a quest. But that's not all. You don't get progress just from discovering a spell, you actually have to play the spell itself in order to get credit on this one. Aside from that, just toss Sorceress into any deck with a quest and play it to your heart's content. A quick note for this one. The quest doesn't have to be a quest line, so if you have any of the old quests in Wild, you're good to go with one of those decks as well. Now, in Standard, it's tough to get more than 2 progress on this per game outside of Rogue with bounces, but she doesn't really match the game plan of Questline Rogue. She fits the most naturally in Questline Priest, but we wanted more than just 2 hits from her, and Raise Dead didn't feel like enough value on its own. So we hopped over to Wild to play this Sorceress Seance Quest Priest, which runs Raise Dead, Spirit of the Dead, Baleful Banker, Seance, and Zola as ways to get additional copies of the Entrapped Sorceress. The deck doesn't even run an 8-cost card to complete the questline, as that's not the main focus of the deck. But as you can see in the gameplay in the background, there are certainly ways to discover 8-cost cards and kill off the opponent with a Purified Shard if you're facing a slow enough opponent. With this deck, reaching the 25 spells required for the achievement won't take long if you can play past turn 5. But when we played this, nearly 50% of our opponents, actually 7 out of 15 of them, were Demon Seed Warlocks. So not only was our win rate dismal, but our rate of progress was slower than we hoped. Without the Demon Seed in Wild anymore, you'll do better with this deck, but it still won't be anywhere close to a 50% win rate. So, if you want to play her in a deck which uses her effectively and touts over a 50% win rate, you might try this Entrapped Quest Standard Shaman from HS Replay. The Shaman questline takes long enough that even if you draw Entrapped Sorceress a little later, there's a good chance she'll still be able to discover a spell for you to play out. Your max progress per game will be 2 spells, as I don't think an additional copy from Diligent Note Taker would count, but we didn't test that. But you'll have the opportunity to climb the ladder while knocking out this achievement that only requires casting 25 discovered spells. Good luck utilizing your inside sources effectively. We just covered an achievement which requires questlines to complete, so let's look at the one for questlines themselves next. Hero's Journey ultimately calls on us to complete 50 questlines. You don't have to play the questline reward for this one, you just have to complete the questline itself. As mentioned during the last achievement, this one is going to depend on which questlines you've opened. If you have a couple questlines, there's a good chance you've already knocked this out. If you haven't, and you're looking for a couple decks that are fairly quick to complete the questlines, we've got a few fast ones to introduce real fast. First up, this Quick Rise of Cariel Paladin deck from HS Replay is pretty consistent at completing the quest on turn 4 or 5, often allowing you to play Cariel on turn 5. I mean, when all but 4 cards in the deck give you progress towards the questline, that's not too difficult. A nice upside to this one is that the win rate of the deck is 56% at the time of writing, so it's pretty strong too. Another fast deck with an above average win rate is this From Seed to Face Warlock deck, also from HS Replay. The questline is a bit more challenging to complete after the nerfs, but this deck is running so much self-damage that the 3 extra damage total requirement is hardly felt as far as completing the questline. You will feel it in regards to the delayed heals and delayed switching to dealing all that damage to the opponent instead, but the deck is still showing above a 50% win rate even after the nerfs. It's not as fast as the Paladin questline, but it's still pretty fast. Though, if you want to play a relatively fast questline deck with potential for some crazy fun games, this Guff's Neverending Quest Druid is one we've enjoyed a lot. The never-ending part is in reference to the fact that we can play an absurd number of Guffs, not that the questline never ends, because we often completed the questline on turn 5 or 6. But yeah, getting multiple extra copies of Guff with Solar Eclipse plus Mark of the Spike Shell, or shuffling in extra copies of him with Northshire Farmer only to draw him out right away with Living Seed felt great. Ironbark is the odd inclusion in case we want to copy a minion from the opponent with Mark of the Spike Shell, but we usually just used it to beef up our own minions so the opponent had an even harder time doing damage to us. If you'd like to see this one in action, check out the video highlight linked in the description. We'd like to introduce a relatively efficient or fun deck for each questline, but for the sake of getting this guide out before rotation, we'll stop here. Feel free to ask for or share ideas in the comments if you're looking for a different questline deck. Best of luck in your own hero's journey. Now, let's move on to the achievement focused on equipping 0 attack weapons. What is your profession? This achievement was introduced for the profession weapons such as Lion's Frenzy, Celestial Inkset, and Rune Mithril Rod, alongside a couple others. And actually, each of the weapons I just mentioned has an achievement of its own, so if your plan is to finish all the achievements, you'll likely want to finish those first and see if you still need to play any more 0 attack weapons once you're done. If you are still needing more after finishing those, in addition to other profession weapons, Sphere of Sapience is a fun way to finish this with combo decks, but there are also a few special weapons in Wild which also have 0 attack. In Standard, you're stuck with Profession weapons and the Sphere for a maximum of 3 weapons per game. In Wild, sadly, since Horde Pillager directly equips a weapon and this achievement asks you to play them, she won't help. However, Rummaging Kobold can give you extra copies to play even after breaking the first one. So there are options if you're looking to get lots of progress per game. That's why the deck we're recommending for finishing off this achievement, Rummaging Through Shadows Priest, runs both copies of Rummaging Kobold as the only minions aside from Twilight Deceptor and Dark Bishop Benedictus, meaning our insights can pull them from the deck more reliably, and our Raised Deads can bring them back for us. The weapon we're playing is the Shadowcloth Needle, and as every single spell in the deck will trigger its effect, it shouldn't take long to break the first copy once it's been equipped. Seance can get us even more kobolds, and we don't actually have to use every charge from every weapon before playing the next one. In our very first game with this deck on stream, we managed to play 5 Shadowcloth Needles and ended the game with another Rummaging Kobold and Seance in hand, while there was another Rummaging Kobold still hiding in the deck. So, the potential for playing quite a few 0 attack weapons per game is there. It almost certainly won't win many games, if any. But you'll knock this achievement out really quickly. Have fun exploring lots of different professions. So we just looked at an achievement to play lots of weapons. Now let's look at one where we need to dissolve some weapons. Snakes on a Blade encourages us to unleash Rustrot Viper onto 10 of our opponent's weapons. As Rustrot Viper is seeing play in a number of meta decks, it wouldn't be surprising if you knocked this one out. But if you're looking to finish off the last few weapons really quickly, we've got a warrior deck in Wild designed to help you do just that. How do you guarantee progress on this achievement even if your opponent isn't playing a deck that runs weapons? We give them a weapon with Weapons Project or Blingtron. This Raid and Rot Warrior had a 100% win rate across 8 games, largely due to the strength of Pirate Warrior in Wild. And that was before the buff to Bloodsail Deckhand. We played as many games as we did because the deck is fast enough that we often killed the opponent before drawing the Viper and a weapon generator. But if you're a bit more patient, you can probably get at least 1 progress per game in most games. It was particularly impressive what this deck was able to do to a Spectral Cutlass rogue, as Weapons Project and Blingtron are just as effective at disrupting their plans as the Viper itself. But yeah, good luck dissolving opponents' blades with your snakes. Next, it's time to mount up for Let's Ride. There are 5 mounts in the game at the moment, but I wouldn't be surprised if we get a few more mounts with the mini set. There's an achievement for priests with the Elic mount and one for Warlock using Dreaded Mount, so you may want to knock those out first. There are effective decks for each in their respective achievement guides. But if you've got a fair number of mount spells left to cast after knocking those out, we've got a couple decks capable of helping you cast quite a few mounts per game. The first and our most highly recommended deck is this Solar Educated Mounts Druid. The only minions in the deck are Educated Elics, which can be pulled from the deck and discounted by Living Seed. The rest of the deck is almost entirely token generators and card draw, with a little mana ramp to speed things along. Solar Eclipse also allows us to cast Kodo Mount twice each time, and the Educated Elics can help us shuffle additional copies of Solar Eclipse and Kodo Mount into the deck, which the amazing draw package can help us draw into. So if everything goes well, you could cast 8 Kodo Mounts per game, not to mention getting additional copies from Nature Studies if you're lucky. Did we decimate a Kargath Prime double Rancor questline warrior while casting 7 Kodo Mounts in our first game with this deck? Yes, we did. Results will vary, but this deck can rush through this achievement. Another deck you could try for a bit of progress towards this each game is this Nazmani Elic Circus Priest. Since Elic Mount is the most expensive mount at 7 mana, We weren't initially planning to introduce a deck with it for this achievement. However, Nazmani Bloodweavers can help overcome that hurdle, and alongside a Gadgetzan Auctioneer draw engine from Cthulhu Priest, without the Cthulhu, it's possible to cycle through the deck while discounting the Elic mounts. Once again, the educated Elics are in the deck to get us additional Elic mounts, and occasionally you can copy an educated Elic with Gift of Illuminance, but there's a decent chance your opponent will concede before killing your Elics off if you do that. One note, Raise Dead can get you additional Bloodweavers, educated Elics, or Auctioneers early on, but it's also possible to bring back Zyrella's Elics later in the game. So keep that in mind if you're hoping to get additional Bloodweavers for discounts from Raise Dead. There have been a fair number of fun hunter decks running Ramming Mount and Barat Kodabane, which we've experimented with as well. But the decks we introduced here are the ones we feel help most players knock out the achievement the fastest. Best of luck mounting up before opponents can gank you. These next two achievements are both centered around minions which have overlapping conditions to be good, so we ended up lumping them together. It's My Way or Hogger's Highway demands that we save 200 mana on Goldshire Knolls, and Butter My Biscuits entices us into restoring 200 health using Spice Bread Bakers. The archetype that is the most successful at drawing into and using lots of cards effectively is Handlock. So the first deck we're introducing is this Spiced Knoll Quest Warlock. It is still running the nerfed quest line from Warlock, but it isn't running the nerfed Runed Mithril Rod. Discounts from the Runed Mithril Rod will count towards the Knoll achievement, so you may choose to swap those back in to replace the Cult Neophytes, but the Neophytes have been quite helpful in the current meta. Since the questline does require taking additional damage now, the Spice Bread Bakers are very nice at keeping us alive long enough to complete the questline or drop a couple Flesh Giants. The Goldshire Knolls frequently dive onto the board on turn 3 or 4, making the likelihood of grabbing an extra copy from Raise Dead a little higher, so this achievement can be knocked out even faster. But if you don't want to play Questline Warlock, another deck which uses the Baker and Goldshire Knoll fairly effectively is this Knuckle-Kneaded Bread Shaman. Evolving a Knoll into a different 10-drop is a fairly common occurrence, but a little extra healing from Spice Bread Baker can go a long ways towards keeping you alive long enough to equip the Bogspine Knuckles. And, as she's understated for the cost, transforming her into a 5-drop after she delivers her bread feels great. It's only possible to play 2 copies of Knolls or Bakers per game with this deck, and your hand is not likely to be as full throughout the game as a Warlock deck, but this is an interesting alternative you can try out. Have fun devouring lots of biscuits while you race down the highway. And now we come to the achievements centered around Stormwind's keyword, tradable. First up, let's tackle Want to Sell. For this one, we need to trade 160 times. It feels like tradable cards have been used quite frequently, with Persistent Peddler and Demon Hunter being particularly popular as a draw tool alongside Tusk Piercer. So, knocking this out while playing with meta decks may just happen naturally. Since every class has access to at least one tradable card, and there are 5 neutral tradable cards, you could just toss 12 to 14 of them into whichever class you're playing, and fill out the deck with other cards to knock this out quickly. However, we wanted to build a deck that actually benefits from trading a bunch, so we crammed all the tradable cards available to Demon Hunter, except Traveling Merchant, into this Fell Trading Quest Demon Hunter. As the name implies, it's a questline Demon Hunter, so trading a few cards early in the game can help us complete the questline a little faster. And, after completion, they can help us find our Fell Spells, Jace, and even Zai for an additional Jace or even more tradable minions. Late in the game, if you don't kill your opponent with Jace, you can just keep trading your minions into each other until the deck runs out, getting a fairly ridiculous amount of progress on this per game. And with a few trades after questline completion, all your tradable minions will cost 0 mana, so you can plop them onto the board all at once for a fair bit of progress towards the next achievement when you're done trading. Good luck making lots of favorable trades. Since we just did want to sell, let's go after want to buy next. This one requires that we actually play out 75 tradable cards rather than toss them back into our deck. Since you have to play 10 Rust-Rot Vipers for Snakes on a Blade achievement, and probably played out a fair number of Persistent Peddlers while tackling the Demon Hunter Spam Collar achievements, which we recommend going after first as they both provide progress towards this, you probably won't have too many tradable minions you have to play out for this one, especially if you played the deck we introduced in the last section. But if you're looking for a fun way to draw into and play out quite a few tradable cards per game, you might try this deck we named the Tarantula Farm. It uses the recently buffed Selective Breeder to get a couple extra early game beasts to help you stay alive, or a couple extra tarantulas in a slower matchup. In the mid game, you can drop the tarantulas and shuffle extra copies into the deck with Northshire Farmer and Dire Frenzy. The Warsong Wranglers and Scavenger's Ingenuities are quite nice as targeted draw if you didn't use them early on, but the Leatherworking Kit has great synergy with the tarantulas, as the 1/1 spiders that get summoned are also beasts, meaning one imported tarantula completely dying on board will often cycle you into another one. Of course, the tarantulas are one of the slowest tradable cards to play, so if you do play this deck with the intent of playing 3, 4, or I don't know, up to 12 copies in a game, you will want to win the early board with your small beasts and Kolkar pack runners. So don't make the same mistake I did a number of times and pick tarantulas from your turn 2 Selective Breeder if you don't have follow-up plays. Smart plays against any but the most aggressive decks, and you're likely to be able to play out somewhere between 3 to 10 tarantulas per game. So to sum it up, the Fell Trading Quest Demon Hunter we covered a moment ago is likely faster progress towards this achievement as well, but playing that deck doesn't let you give Arachnophobia opponents nightmares with an endless swarm of spiders. Have fun buying nightmares for your opponents. We've made it to the last achievement. They Carry My Potions is the last Stormwind achievement until the mini set arrives. The Encumbered Pack Mules are decently strong in Hand Buff Paladin and Aggro Druid, so if you play enough with one of those decks, you'll knock this out eventually. But the deck we're introducing is designed so that, you guessed it, you can get a fair bit of extra progress per game. We were going to introduce the deck we used to knock this achievement out, which was built around the idea of using lots of copies of Encumbered Pack Mules to make a wall on the board as we gradually completed the Hunter questline. But the deck had a terrible win rate, and since the buff to Leatherworking Kit makes drawing the Pack Mules much more reliable, we decided to go with a more recent deck, which is also a ton of fun to play. This Breeding Predators Hunter runs Northshire Farmers and Dire Frenzies for additional copies of whichever beast we choose. And the Leatherworking Kit, Scavenger's Ingenuity, and Warsong Wrangler are a great targeted way to draw the pack mules from our deck. Now, our main focus with this deck was to copy and summon as many Zixors as possible, but if you're after this achievement, just shifting focus to the pack mules and using Zixor as a finisher is probably an even stronger way to play this deck. I should point out a couple things real quick. First, since Selective Breeder discovers a copy of the mule rather than drawing it, pack mules from him will not trigger the copy effect, so you won't get any progress that way. Also, if you have an original Zixor and Zixor Prime in the deck at the same time alongside Pack Mules and Walpertingers, it is possible the Warsong Wrangler could miss the Pack Mule. If your focus is as swift of progress as possible over some games taking wacky fun twists, you'll probably want to drop the Zixor and Jewel of Nzoth for a couple Trampling Rhinos. But if you'd like to see how we piloted the deck as is, we've got a highlight video in the description you can watch to see it in action. Best of luck building a wall of pack mules. And that's a wrap. If you found this helpful, drop a like. Your enthusiastic endorsement of this video can get it on a flight path to meet other adventurers on a hero's journey to summon the Sword of 1,000 Truths, alongside the rest of these achievements. We've got a bunch more interesting content coming soon, and we will be covering the mini set achievements in a few weeks. So check back soon, or subscribe, because our videos could get entrapped behind all the other recommendations if you're not subscribed. If you have any questions or suggestions, let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy participating in Experiments Live, check out our stream at twitch.tv/SSAlchemist. We currently stream on Saturdays and Sundays. And remember, you're awesome. Thank you for watching, and have an awesome day.